everybody, and welcome to another board game review and gameplay demo. Today we've got another Kickstarter preview that comes to us courtesy of Dr. Finn Games. This particular game is called C.O.G, or the Cabinet of Gadgetry. This is a steampunk-themed game where the idea is that you are building up components for a large machine that will allow the citizens of London to move about freely. So the way that we're going to be doing that is through a combination of worker placement and then also placing down letter tiles on individual tableaus so that we can literally spell out the individual components. Once you spell it out, you get victory points. That's how the game works. In this case, it's victory point based. Whoever has the most at the end of the game wins. Now, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Stephen Finn is most famous for designing Biblios. In addition to that, he also has a good number of other games that are in that same sort of vein, where mechanistically they are relatively simple, they're very, very easy to learn, a ton of fun to play, and also very quick. C.O.G is a little bit of a departure from that sort of formula for him, in that this is a much more mechanistically complex game, and on top of that, it takes a lot longer to play. You're talking about 60 to 90 minutes or so. That said, it is tremendously fun. The theme is amazing. I am a big fan of steampunk, and I think that it's the perfect setting for a game like this. But without further ado, we're going to get right on ahead and talk about what this game is similar to. As far as similarities are concerned, there are two major ones I wanted to mention, both of which are mechanistic similarities. The first one is Kingsburg. And for Kingsburg, the idea is that you are rolling dice, and depending on the number of pips, how many you want to use, how you want to combine them, you influence different members of a king's court, and you get resources depending on who you influence. In C.O.G, you have several different sections of the board on which you are placing your workers. Now the thing is, with each section, there are several rewards that you can get, and so whichever one you place on, that is the specific reward you're going to get. The reason that I picked Kingsburg as the similarity is because, like Kingsburg, you always know exactly what it is that you're going to get in C.O.G, because it's laying out on the table for you. You can see, if I put my piece here, I'm going to get that. Things of that nature. Now that said, the strategy behind picking exactly what you want is much deeper in C.O.G compared to Kingsburg, simply because you have to think not only a single turn or a single phase ahead, but you have to think through the entire game, because you're going to be getting cards that you'll be able to play down, you'll be getting the turn order for the next round, all of that kind of stuff. So there is a lot going on with the worker placement, but unlike most worker placement games, where you tend to just sort of be doing it almost blindly, and like maybe you draw a card, you don't know what card it's going to be, or you're just sort of waiting for things to build up, things like that. It is much more the instant satisfaction round to round that you get with Kingsburg. So that's why it's my first similarity. The second similarity may be fairly obvious, considering that the other major aspect to this game is spelling out words on a grid, and that is Scrabble. Scrabble is a game I have literally never talked about, mostly because I am absolutely horrible at Scrabble. But that's essentially half of the game. That's half of what C.O.G is. The really nice thing about C.O.G, though, is two things that, in my mind, put it over Scrabble in the sense of how this works. First off, you don't have to worry about what you're going to spell, because there are a limited number of words that you're spelling, and you have a card that tells you what it is that it wants you to spell. The second major thing is that you have a mechanically different system as far as placing down the words. Not only are you able to remove words off of the boards, but when you have a wild, then it can actually count as two different letters for two different words. So there's a lot more flexibility in terms of actually placing down the letter tiles and figuring out what it is that you're trying to spell. So for somebody like me who's really bad at Scrabble, it really helps, and it becomes a very, very fun mechanism. I really enjoy it. But with that, we are going to go right on ahead into my demo for how to play C.O.G. Alright everybody, we're pretty much all set up and ready to start playing some COG. Before I get started, I wanted to mention one brief thing, and that is, keep in mind that this is a preview prototype copy. So some things might change slightly when the final game comes out, and particularly the quality of the components is going to be much, much higher. In addition to that, I wanted to mention that this is a game that is about victory points. That's what we're going to be talking about. As I go through and I do my discussion, then I'll let you know how it is that we get victory points throughout. That said, I'm going to do this a little bit differently than most of my sort of demos that I've done for these videos, in that I will talk about all the different game components, what everything is and what it does, and then I'll just go through a single turn. I'll go through the individual phases. We've got this little game phase card, and so I'll show you this is when we use these individual things. So hopefully that'll make it at least a little bit more clear. That said, you can see we do have quite a few components here. First off, for each individual player, I've got 3 players here. For each individual person, you get a player tableau, which is this big giant board that I'll talk about later on at the end of this demo. Everybody gets these little cubes that we'll use to represent completed words. Everybody gets these little COG tokens, which are essentially our workers for the worker placement aspect. Everybody also gets a set of 6 goal cards. These goal cards work very similarly to the cards in, say, something like Libertalia, where what we're going to do is we're going to remove one randomly. So we'll take the cards here and we'll just take one out permanently, and then the rest of the 5 will be set up at the top of our board. As we complete words, then what we're going to do is we're going to take our little square, our cube tokens, and we're going to put them on the individual words to indicate that we have spelled those particular things. In addition, everybody will receive 2 random letters from the bag, which will go into the reserve pile, or the reserve stack, I should say. So everybody will get 2, and they just go on the side over here, just like that. O and B seem to be very popular. Alright. So, just like that. And last but not least, I did want to mention that everything is color-coded. So you can see the back of the goal cards for the red player are these nice red cogs. Same thing for the actual player tableaus, which you'll see at the end of this little tutorial when I discuss specifically about these particular things. Now, the rest of the components, we have this main central board here. This is where we're going to be putting a lot of different stuff. There are 2 sides to this. This particular side is for 2 or 3 players. On the back is the side that you use for 4 players. You can see this central section is much, much larger. There's also more space for these things on the edges. On the edges is where we're actually going to be placing our workers and getting our bonuses through the different phases, right? So what we need to put on here first are our little tokens, these little dudes. They start there, and they're actually going to be moving around this little central area. We also put 3 individual little tokens right here, individual word, letters I should say, letter tokens. And then we've got our victory point pile over here, which is ready to go. In addition, we also have our player order tokens. So in this case, we just have 1, 2, and 3 because we've only got 3 players. It says that you start with whoever you wish, so we'll go ahead and start with this person as number 1, and then number 2, and number 3. Now, similar to many, many different worker placement games, the people who are farther down in the order are going to get a little bonus. In this case, the second player is going to get a star token. These act as sort of like wild power type of things that can do all sorts of different stuff throughout the phases. And they go right there in the corner. And the next player will receive 3 victory points. So what we do is we'll take 3 victory points worth. So in this case, we've got a 1 and a 2, and then they go right there in that pile. Now, victory points, however many you have, are hidden. Everything else is open for everybody to see. Everybody can see your reserve tiles, but only you are allowed to look at your victory points. In addition, everybody can see how many of those star tokens you have, all of that kind of stuff. Right? Lastly, if we had a 4th player, the 4th player would receive a random tile from the bag. So they would start off with 3 of the letter tiles instead of just 2. Right? So after everybody has taken out the specific goal card and put it away, then we are ready to go. So the first phase is the preparation phase. This is when we get the central board ready for everybody to start playing, essentially. So what we'll do is we'll roll all these dice, and then we'll put them in their designated portions. So we've got pink 4, black 4 as well, and then we've got blue 5 and red 1. After we set up our dice, we draw up our cabinet cards. The cabinet cards are cards that we will be getting through the worker placement mechanic that help us in numerous different ways. There are two major types. There are power and there are item cards. The power cards are these types where they have a singular icon and then they've got two smaller icons on the bottom. Since we're playing with only 3 players, we only put out 3 cards here. This one right here, this is an example of an item card, and essentially it lets you either get a different bonus from spelling out a specific word or partially spelling it, or you can get the bonus on your goal card. I'll be explaining how both of those work once I get to the phases that involve them, right? Next up is this side of the board. This is where we determine the player order. And what we need is we need the rewards for it. So if you pick to go first in the next round, then you don't get any bonus. If you pick to go second, then you'll get a star token. So that'll go right there. And then if you pick to go third, you will get 3 victory points for electing to go last in this case, because again, we've only got 3 players. All right? So there's that. Last but not least, we got to set up the top here. So at the top is where we're going to be getting some various different tiles, the letter tiles, right? So for this first spot, we get 1 letter tile and a star token. Well, that's not very helpful. So that's why I have this little star token here, is to remind me that it's supposed to be a star token and not 3 letter tiles. So you notice we've got 3 things on each one except for the dice, where we are using all 4, even though we've only got 3 players. If you have 2 players, then you would take away the black die and you wouldn't use that. And there's also some cards, you can see 2 of these right here that require the black die. You would remove those from the game if you're only playing with 2 players as well. But now we are all set up. That is the end of phase 1. Phase 2 is when we actually do the worker placement mechanic aspect to the game. This is where we're going to be taking our COG tokens and we're going to be placing them around the board to collect these different rewards. Now for the first round, this won't really make that much of a difference, but as you get farther along in rounds, then you're going to be looking for specific letters so that you can complete words that you need. You're going to be looking for, do I need the star token? Because you can do a lot with the individual star tokens. Same thing with the cabinet cards. Are there cabinet cards that are going to help you out more or less compared to other ones? And then the dice. For some of the cabinet cards, you need the specific die or number of pips to activate them. So that's essentially how it works. And this goes just in turn order, starting with player number 1. They will place down a single worker or single cog, and then it goes to player 2, 3, and then it just goes around and around until everybody has played all 4 of them. This is also where we can start using our star tokens if we've got them. For example, with the dice, if you use a star token, then you're able to re-roll whatever the die is, and you have to use the number of pips that come up the next time. For the cabinet cards, after you take a card, then you can spend a star token, discard it, reshuffle, and take a new card from the top. On the turn order, what you can do is you can actually force somebody down. So for example, if I'm there on the top person, then green can spend a star token and force me down so that now green is going to be the first player. And then this reward essentially gets forfeited. I wouldn't be able to get that as the red player. Okay? One thing I also forgot to mention with the dice, this is also where our little guys move. So I'll go over all of that. Right? Let me get a star token over here. So as the first player, I am going to go ahead and think about what it is that I need here. We will go with the black die. So I'll take that, so I now have the black 4. And I'll just do the rest of the workers for this particular one right here. We'll go with this cabinet card. And then I will take a star token. And last but not least, I will take the U and the C. Now one thing is that after you take your die token, then you move your little pawn that number of pips. So I got 4, so that means that I move my red pawn 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So that means that I get one of the not one of the items, but one of the letters that are on this board. And I will go ahead and take an A. And then after you take an item letter from there, you immediately replace it, just like that. As as you are moving, if somebody were to move on top of me, they would not get the bonus. They are not allowed to have it. Okay? So if they move right behind me, they can, and all that kind of stuff. So the iconography in this game is actually relatively easy to figure out, so don't worry about that. It's fairly simple. Okay? And that is the end of the collect phase. After everybody has spent all 4 of their workers, you need to have 1 on each side of the board. You can't put 2 on the top, 2 on the side. It has to be 1 for each. So you always get a cabinet card, a die, you determine your turn order, and then you get your letters. Now, we keep our same turn order cards until the end of the round, because this can potentially matter. More than likely it really won't though. Right. Next up is phase 3, which is activate the cabinet cards. So this is where I'll talk more about how these cabinet cards actually work. Right. Most of the cabinet cards that we're going to be utilizing right now are going to be these, the power cards. So in this particular case, if I have a black die, then I will get a random token from the back, okay? And I can use it once per round. You can look at this one, this is the same thing. If you have the black die, then once per round, you would get 3 victory point chips, okay? These cards, the item cards, don't come into play just yet, but the various power cards have all sorts of different things. So this is a really interesting one, for example. This one will turn any of B's, C's, and G's into wilds. In other words, you will flip them around. Again, I will explain all of that towards the end of this when I start talking about the player board specifically. But this happens infinitely, so this always happens. As soon as you acquire any of those letters, you immediately flip them over. And if you acquire this card, then any letters that you have that match that will be flipped over as well to become wild cards. Okay? There's all sorts of really cool little power cards like that, and this is the phase where we activate them. The only ones that are a real exception to this are the ones that have a specific icon that looks like a red lightning bolt. Those are single-use cards. So you use it once and then you discard it. So for example, with this one right here, you can see it's a little lightning bolt. You don't even need to utilize a die for it. It has no dice requirement, but when you acquire it, then you essentially use it right away as soon as you get it, and then you immediately receive 7 victory points. Okay? So you can see how it is that it becomes very, very strategic in terms of what cards you're going to be picking, how you're going to be picking them, all of that kind of stuff, right? So I will activate my cabinet card because I have the black die, and that means that I get a random letter from this. Okay. Next up is phase number 4, which is construct. During the construction phase, this is where the crossword aspect comes into play on our tableaus. So you can see we've got all of our goal cards here. The goal cards indicate the words that we are trying to spell. You can only spell the words that are on your goal cards, and you can only utilize the letters that you currently have in your reserve or the wilds that you have. So let me see if there's anything that I can spell. I don't believe that there is, unfortunately. Let me see. I'm close on a couple. Here, let me swap one out just so that you guys can see it. Here we'll swap an A for a G. Haha! I'm sneaky like that. The first one that you place down, the first word that you place down, has to occupy at least part of this central area, these central 4 squares. So for example, I now have C.O.G, which is COG. It's on goal number 2. So I can't put it like up here randomly. Right? I can't do it. Again, it's just like in Scrabble, where you need to be going through that central space. Okay? And once it's there, then I will take one of my little indicators here and put it on top of COG. Alright? Now, the other part of this particular round is this is where the item cards come into play, because we'll be able to utilize those if we want to, and we don't have to spell them on top of our tableau. So for example, here's a good one. This one's an easy one. So you can see here we've got tin. Now in this case, we actually do not have tin as one of the available words. So that's not going to work well. We do have lock. however. And the idea behind these item cards is that you only need the letters that are really big and bolded. In this case, we would only need the C and the K, the last two letters of lock. If we have both of those, then what we would do is we would discard them, put the letters back into the bag, and then we would receive either the bonus that's listed on the card, which in this case is 5 victory points and a random letter tile, or we could put it onto our particular goal card that is relevant to it. So for example, if I had the K, and here we go, there's a K. If I had the K and the C, so I just say the C, and then I say the K, just like that. So if I had it like that, I would take these, I would discard them. This card I would flip over and leave next to my, my player board, because at the end of the game we count these, and these are part of victory points. After that, I would take either my little thing and indicate that I spelled lock because I used an item card, or I would take my 5 victory points and my random tile, whichever one I prefer, right? So again, there's a lot of strategy going on in terms of what you're building, when you're building it, how you're building it, all that kind of stuff. As a side note, if you are doing that, if you are building up all this stuff, and you use an item card and you already have it spelled on your Tableau, you have to take the goal card bonus. But that means that essentially you can spend only one or two tiles to get additional victory points, which is huge in this game, right? After you have spelled out everything on an individual goal card, then you will receive the particular bonus that is listed at the top of the card. So for example, we've got 25 points, 15 points, 10 points, and a random tile, and then 25 points, a star token, and a random tile, right? The other big thing for this particular phase is the wilds. I mentioned these a couple of times. If you have wild cards or wild letters, it simply means that you're going to have a letter token that is flipped upside down, so it looks blank, right? And in this case, what I could do is I could say blank O.G. So now this is C.O.G, okay? Even though it is a blank. That's how the wilds work. If you have a star token, then you can spend a star token, put it back in the pile, and flip over any one tile, any single tile that you have either on your Tableau or in your reserve, so that it becomes a wild. So you can see how important these wilds can become, because the way that wilds work in this game is that they are anything that you need them to be, right? This is not always going to be a C in order to spell C-O-G, in order to spell C.O.G. It could also be used as, say, a G, so I could spell G-A-S, gas. You know, anything along those lines. That's how they work. Again, I'll get to that in just a little bit when I do the close-up on the Tableau specifically, though. Okay, but that is the end of the construction phase. That is what we are doing. We are building up our Tableau, and this happens simultaneously. So it's kind of nice because you don't have to worry too much about going in turn order and all that kind of stuff. In addition, the standard rules of Scrabble will apply in terms of you can't have backwards words, you can't spell diagonally, all that kind of stuff. Everything has to be either left to right or up to down when you are spelling out your words. But unlike in Scrabble, you cannot spell 2 words at a time. You can't have, even if they are 2 words that you have on your goal cards, you cannot do it, right? It is not allowed. What you are allowed to do is remove tiles, though. You are allowed to do that. So for example, if I had, let me see if I can find the right ones here. So if I had an I and an L, here I'll just borrow this I, so then I would have O-I-L, I would have oil, right? And I would have my little marker right there on oil, okay? What I could do is I could remove the I and the L, take it off the board, I would remove my cube from oil, and I would put those back. So essentially that allows you to sort of rearrange your crossword, your Tableau a little bit. The only thing is that if it is part of a card that you have already completed, you cannot take it off, and it has to remain there. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the construction phase, because literally the construction is you are building up your words, whether by the item cards that you then leave to the side, or by your player tableau using any of the letters in your reserve. Now note, you do not have to spell anything even if you can. It is not a requirement to do so. You can spell as many words as you want, but again, you have to do them one at a time. You can't spell 2 words simultaneously. So next up is the conclude phase, which is essentially like the cleanup phase for pretty much anything else. So in this case, what we would do is we would move the clock forward. So in this case, we'd go on to round 2, and then we would redo the turn order. So we'd collect these, and then based off of what we picked on this particular scale over here, we would redistribute them. So let's say we went, 2, 3, and 1, whatever it happens to be. It doesn't matter. But the important thing is that we redistribute these as appropriate based on that. We return all of the dice, and then we check to make sure that we don't have too many or too few tiles. If you have 2 or 1 tile, you'll draw 1, all right? And then if you have 7 or more, then you would have to discard a bunch as well. In addition, you can only ever have a maximum of 3 star tokens as well. Okay, and then you continue on until the end of the round, and at the end, we will have the end game scoring. For the end of the game scoring, the easiest part is that we're going to be adding up whatever VP tokens that we have in our little stash that are upside down over here. And then in addition to that, for every gold tile that you have not completed, then you will get 1 VP per completed word, and then 1 VP for each letter in the completed word. So for example, here I've got C.O.G, so I would get a total of 4 victory points for that, 1 for completing the word, and then C.O.G. So I would get 4 total victory points there. Completed item cards, you get 5 victory points for every completed item card more than the player who had the fewest. So in other words, if I completed 2 and another player completed none, then I would get 10 victory points. If I completed 3 and somebody else completed 2, I would only get 5 victory points, right? So it's the difference between yours and the person who had the fewest. In other words, the person with the fewest gets no bonus victory points for completing the individual item cards. Lastly, the letter tiles. For every 2 letters you have, you get an additional 1 victory point. Okay, and that's it. That's the end of C.O.G. That's how it all works. Y'all can see there is a lot going on here mechanistically, and obviously as you progress in the game, you're going to be looking more and more strategically at what you're going to be picking from this central board and all that good stuff. But now what I'll do is I'll go and I'll do a quick close-up view of the player tableau so that you can get more information and really see what's going on with it. Alright everybody, here we are with our player tableau. You can see we've got all of our very important stuff here. Right here, this is the spot where we will be putting our victory points. Again, face down so nobody can see them. Over here we've got a key to all of the individual symbols in the game so that you know whenever it comes up, however it comes up, that is what you're going to do. And that includes for the individual cabinet cards as well, so that you can tell how it's activated, what the cost is, as well as when and how you can use it. At the bottom here, we've got a listing of all of the individual letters in the bag and how many of each letter there are. We are not using every single letter in the English alphabet because not all of the words utilize every letter. And again, we are only going to be spelling the words that are on these individual gold cards. Over here, we've got our reserve of the tiles. Down here is our storage for our star tokens. And then we just set our round marker to the side. Same thing, we've got our die, assuming that this is during the construction phase. We've got our tokens to indicate what words we're spelling, our discarded gold card, which would actually be in the box, and then our C.O.G workers, which would be on the board at this point. So to give you an idea of exactly how the construction phase works, here's what we're going to be doing. Say, for example, that we wanted to spell this. We want to say, so these are the 4 central tiles. We have to go through at least one of those. So here we've got C-L-A-M-P, clamp. right? Clamp is indeed one of the words, and it is right here on goal card number 1. Right, so we have officially spelled that. Now, we are, again, allowed to spell as many as we want, as many as we're capable of, so long as we do not spell 2 at a time. The problem is with R and D and then all of these letters, we can't really do a whole lot. But what we can do, again, is we can spend a star token. When we spend a star token, then we turn something wild. For example, we can take the L and flip it over. So for this word, that is an L, and it is clamp. But then we can take R and D, and now this is R-O-D, rod, which is right here on goal card number 5. So again, the way that the wild tokens work in terms of the actual tableau is that it's 2 intersecting words, and it can count as 2 different letters, one for each individual word. It does not have to be the same letter. Okay? Again, one of the important caveats is that you are not allowed to spell 2 words simultaneously. That's going to be the biggest thing. But essentially, that's all the information that you're going to be keeping in and around this. And again, you'll have your cabinet cards, whatever they happen to be. So say you've got this one. This is a flash one that you would immediately use. And in this case, you would get a random token, a star token, and 5 victory points from this. And then you would go ahead and discard it. Let's say we've got that build up. Here we've got NUT for nut. Right? Say, for example, that we had this as a wild. We could spend that as the T, and then we could either take our individual thing here and place it up there to indicate that we spelled the word, or we could take 2 victory points, a random token from the bag, a random letter from the bag, and a star token. Okay, so again, that's how those work. Either way, after we're done with it, this letter will go back to the bag, and then this will be flipped over and just sort of put to the side of our thing. And we'll have the cabinet cards close by so that we know when we're able to use the powers, just depending on what die we got. In this example, I've got the black die, so I would be able to use this particular one because it's got the black die pictured. On this one, I would need to get the orange, or in this case, like the more red die. Again, because this is a prototype, the colors are not exactly matching. One thing that I would like to note as well is that you guys know how I am about like flimsy money and things like that, and you can see that with these victory point tokens, they, as of right now at least, they're flimsy. I don't know if they're going to be cardboard or anything like that. You could use poker chips or whatever you want. Poker chips obviously not going to be invisible and not going to be hideable from everybody else, but at the same time I really like the design for these, so I actually prefer to keep these personally, just because I think they look better, because again, the steampunk theme for this game really shines through very, very well, and I absolutely love it. So again, lots going on, really fun little Tableau spelling mechanic that we've got here. Again, it is a bit difficult to get used to, but with that, we're going to go right on ahead into the conclusions and the pros and cons for this game so that you can hear all about that kind of stuff. Well, everybody, I hope that you enjoyed my little demo for C.O.G. As I mentioned earlier in this video, this is a very unique and really intriguing game. It's a ton of fun. That said, we'll move into some pros and cons right now. First, the biggest con is also a slight pro for me, and it is this new mechanic of the crossword spelling thing. The reason that it's a pro for me is because I just really enjoyed it. I thought that it was a lot of fun. The reason that it's a con for me, though, is because it took me a little while to get used to it. Now, me, like many other people, are probably in a Scrabble mindset. And with Scrabble, if you place down your tiles, you can spell more than one word. With C.O.G, you're not allowed to spell more than one word. If you use a wild token in Scrabble, then it counts as a single letter. In C.O.G, you can count as 2 different letters for 2 different words. And on top of that, you can also take letters off in C.O.G as well, if it's strategically valuable for you. So it can be a little bit jarring to get out of that mindset, but again, when I mentioned the similarities, one of the things I like about this game, as far as its Scrabble similarity, is that it boiled it down and it simplified it, which is wonderful for people like me who are terrible at Scrabble. So I really appreciate that. And again, it's both a pro and a con, but by far that was the mechanic that took myself and my gaming friends the longest to really understand and get through. That said, it really really is the only major con for this game that we had. As we were playing through it, we all had a really good time. It was a lot of fun, and as far as pros are concerned, there's a handful I wanted to specifically mention. First and foremost is that as a worker placement game, this is a surprisingly streamlined and fast-moving one. Now, for those of you who have played worker placement games before, you know that analysis paralysis can always hit, and it means that somebody is just sitting there thinking, and it can be really frustrating because you have to wait for them to make a decision before we can move on with the game. In COG, not only are many of the sections of the game simultaneous, so you don't even have to worry about everybody else, the worker placement mechanic, which does go in turn order, is actually really not that bad because you are looking at what you're going to get. In most of these games, you are drawing up a random card or something along those lines. You don't necessarily know what you're going to be getting, and then once you have it, you're not entirely certain how to use it, whereas in COG, you can plan much farther ahead and you're able to see exactly what it is that you're going to be getting. So it moves things along much, much faster. Moving right along, another pro, but relatively minor, and partial con as well, is the sort of variety for the game. And this comes into two flavors. We've got the number of players, which is great. It plays very well with 2 to 4 players. There's 2-player variant, and then it goes 3 and 4 players. So it's very well balanced for the different numbers of players. Now, I've played games where it feels like they were designed specifically around a certain number of players, and it's just sort of like, oh, and also you can play this number, or oh, you can play this number. But if you play it with that right number of players, then it's more amazing. Whereas with COG, I didn't feel that there was necessarily a correct number because there's a lot of balancing that happens between like flipping the board, activating the variants for the 2-player, all that kind of stuff. So I really appreciated that. A bit of a con as far as the variety is concerned is that everybody's going for victory points, and really there is a single main way to get the victory points, and that is completing those cards with all the item cards with the words on them. That said, you can go about doing that in several different ways. You can utilize the star tokens, you can utilize your other cards that will activate and allow you to flip tiles to wild so that you can spell things out easier, all that kind of stuff. So yes, everybody is moving towards the same goal, but it's nice because you do have a little bit of wiggle room. Now, sometimes when games try to expand out too much and do where you've got this distinct avenue, this one, and this one, everything can sort of get muddled and lost. Whereas with COG, it's nice because they've got a singular avenue to victory points, or a very relatively narrow range of paths. But the nice thing is that the way that you go about doing them is you can sort of, like zigzag around. You can try straight through, metaphorically, obviously. So it's kind of nice in that sense, where you do have that variety, so it keeps the game from going stale. Along those same veins, my last major pro for this game is the fact that I was really expecting it to feel like a jumbled mess, because we've got worker placement, we've got card like Tableau building, we've got the word tile Tableau building, all of this kind of stuff. So I really expected to feel completely lost and confused and all this kind of stuff. As I mentioned with my con, the initial word placement thing did have me confused, but beyond that, everything actually melds together very, very well. And I think the idea behind that, or the reason for it, is the fact that the worker placement aspect directly feeds into everything else. It doesn't feel like anything is sort of disjointed and on its own. You can distinctly see the worker placement aspect coming together with the item building aspect, for example, all that kind of stuff. So it really helps in terms of making the game feel cohesive. And again, this may be something that you thought as I was going through my demo and everything, but honestly, it feels very clean, very neat, and it is a ton of fun. And that's pretty much it for my general conclusions as well. I've mentioned several times throughout this video that I really enjoyed this game, almost surprisingly so. Mostly because I fully expected that the word tile Tableau building would just be an instant turnoff for me whenever I actually attempted the game, because I am not a wordsmith type of person, but the way that it's built up, the fact that you don't have to really think about the words, you have the constantly flipping tiles, all that kind of stuff, the way that the game melds to itself, and becomes a very, very nicely designed, cohesive entity, so to speak, just makes for a very, very fun and very unique playing experience. With that, I will mention that the Kickstarter is live right now. It began on October 19th. You can check the link in the description below if you want to back it, if you just want more information, whatever it happens to be. Please go and at least take a look at the page and see if you can find out some more information about it. But with that, thank you so very much for watching this preview for C.O.G. Please let me know any and all thoughts that you have about it in the comments below, including any other games that you'd like to see me review in the future. But with that, thank you very much again for watching, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much again, everybody, for watching my Kickstarter preview for C.O.G. Once again, I hope that you really enjoyed it and at the very least are somewhat more intrigued so that you can check out the campaign and learn more about the game. As I said, it is on Kickstarter now, so be sure to go and check it out. And as always, I've got several of my playlists linked up at the top of the page so that you can see some more of my work. As always, please put any and all thoughts into the comments below, including other games that you would like to see, what you think about this game, etc., etc. You all know that I love hearing from you. With that, thank you very, very much again, and I will see you next time.